Welcome to Amazing Business Radio with best-selling author and customer service and business expert, Shep Hyken. Shep will talk with some of the smartest thinkers in business to help make you more successful in your professional and personal life. This is Amazing Business Radio with Shep Hyken.
Hello, everybody. It's Shep Hyken. We're back with another episode of Amazing Business Radio. I have a very unique guest today. I don't believe I've ever had a guest quite like this. Somebody that leads, but not a customer service team. As a matter of fact, when I first heard this gentleman do a presentation, I was at Scott Air Force Base with a number of other entrepreneurs and business owners, and we listened to Chief Master Sergeant Brian P. Kruzelnick, who is the Command Senior Enlisted Leader for the U.S. Transportation Command. And in a little while, you'll find out exactly what that means. But he is in charge of one heck of a lot when it comes to the military. Throughout his presentation, he referred to customers, and those customers happen to be Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines, Coast Guard, et cetera, and other countries that he was helping and supporting in what they do. So we're going to talk about leadership in crisis situations because there's a couple of incidents, one currently happening today in the Middle East. He was involved directly with the evacuation over in Afghanistan 2 or 3 years ago. Seems like it was just yesterday, and a number of other areas that he's worked in, and he understands what leadership means. And if we bring it back to a company, has there ever been a customer that complained? How was it managed? Has there ever been a situation where there was a brand in crisis? How did the leadership manage? How did they keep their teams focused on the North Star? That's what we're going to talk about, and a whole lot more when we talk with BK, Brian P. Kruzelnick. All right, before we get into this interview, a quick announcement. If you've got questions or you want to share a story about anything related to customer service and experience, reach out to me on any of the social channels. I am everywhere. Be sure to use the hashtag AskShep if you want me to answer the question, and I can answer it there in the social channel, on this podcast, in my newsletter, or on my TV show, Be Amazing or Go Home, where you can find episodes on Apple TV, Amazon Prime, and just go to beamazing.tv and you'll hear, you can binge on all of the episodes. All right. Well, it's time to get into the interview, so let's go ahead and get started. BK, welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate being here, and it's a pleasure to spend some time with you.
Now, you called me sir, but I need to call you sir. After all, you are the Chief Master Sergeant, Brian P. Kruzelnick. Boy, that's a hard one to say, but I said it, and they know you as BK, which I appreciate. You and I first met when I was at Scott Air Force Base, probably about a month or so ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, and you put on an incredible presentation about leadership, and I would say in crisis situations. And a lot of our clients and a lot of people listening to the show have probably had crisis situations, but not quite the same level of crisis that you have. And the other thing that intrigued me, why I said, I've got to have this guy on the show, is you started to refer to the other military branches like, Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines, all of them. You started to refer to them as your customers. And I became very intrigued, even more so at that point. So why don't we start with just by sharing with our audience exactly what you do over there? Because it is amazing.
Well, I appreciate that, and you're too kind with your words. I don't know if it was that good, but I had fun, and looked like you guys had some fun too. At the end of the day, me as a person, I'm a father, I'm a husband, and I've been lucky enough to be a military member for about 30 years. I try to keep it in that order, but mission sometimes dictates who gets what first. And as a position, I work directly for the 4-star general that happens to be in charge of the organization I'm a part of, and I primarily work as an advisor for integration, utilization of the forces that fall underneath us. But I would say probably my biggest responsibility is about readiness. We need to ready the force we have to do hard stuff. And that hard stuff could be a battle with an adversary, humanitarian relief to somebody, disaster relief to somebody around the world. So I need to make sure that they're trained, we have the right resources, maybe we're influencing policy to help do that. And that's kind of my job. I can talk a little about the organization if you want, but that's kind of what I do.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And your customers are all the different branches of the military. If they need tanks, if they need planes, if they need anything, you're making sure they get over there.
You're exactly right. So essentially, we are a large global transportation company that moves things across land, air, sea for the Department of Defense. This could be for a service to another country. This could be just DoD assets to help out another country. This could be supplies for humanitarian disaster that just happened or something along those lines. But that's ultimately our responsibility to move things globally, sometimes simultaneously around the world.
Yeah, and I know you also keep jets in the air because I've watched the demo. When I was out there, I'm not to say it was the first time, but one of the times I was out at your military base, we got to watch how you refuel in the air. It just blows me away. And before we go any further, one huge, huge thank you for your service and what you do for our country, because you and the people you work with are the reason we can do what we do today.
Wow, I mean, no, thank you. I appreciate that, but thank you as well, and thank you for all that you do and all the education that you lay out and in trying to improve cultures within organizations and improve the way people do business. And it's felt, I'm positive it's felt exponentially out. So thank you for that.
Well, let's talk about, I want to talk about two incidents. One you shared, and the other one was shared by one of your colleagues in preparation for this interview. I had some other interviews, and we talked about, the one you talked about was the evacuation of Afghanistan, but the other one is really happening right now as we record this. There's something going on in the Middle East. You guys have come in with military, or not military, I guess some military aid, but also really the aid from food and medical supplies and everything else. And that you've not only had to coordinate with other branches of the military, you've coordinated with other countries throughout the world. So why don't we start there and talk about how do you work with so many customers and what's your, you're the leader. How does this happen? I don't even know where to begin. I don't even know what question to actually start with. But I know I can wind you up and you're going to start talking and you will.
You could. So look, this is a podcast, so I'm going to make sure that I'm not transmitting so much where we don't have open dialogue. But so let me just kind of break down. I said Transportation Command, and people on the line or listening to this might not know what that means. If you take the world and break it up into zones, so to speak, we have a 4-star general agnostic to service, a confirmed nominated 4-star general is in charge of zones. There's ones in charge of North and South America, one in charge of Europe, one in charge of the Pacific, the Middle East, Africa. They have to protect that zone. If anything happens in that zone, then we have to flood things to that zone to help them. Services, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, Space Force, and then, Coast Guard as a Homeland Defense entity, they have responsibility to train their people, to equip them, to organize, to respond to wherever we need them to respond to. The response happens through combatant commands, and that's what I'm a part of. So we don't have a geographic area. We own the world. So if anything happens in any of those zones, we bring everything to that zone. We bring the fuel, we'll bring the cargo, we'll bring the people, the munitions, whatever needs to happen. That's really our job, supporting every single other combatant, really supporting the world. And within those zones are, as you said, whatever countries happen to be affected within those zones. And those are the ones that we will definitely fall on and make sure that we get the aid they need so they can get through whatever trying time that they have.
And so what's happening right now in the Middle East, you're involved with, I believe you've helped build, or you haven't, but you've sent what's needed to help build a pier so that boats can come in and bring humanitarian aid to some of the people that are in that part of the world that are just experiencing really, they're just having a terrible time over there. It's the starvation, the infrastructure has been destroyed. Anything you can share about, a unique perspective on how you manage that? Because there's a lot of moving parts and probably a lot of egos in the way of getting things done.
Well, funny enough, in the time of crisis, things sometimes become more clear. You have a clearer objective, and people can come, rally around that. And there's going to be one voice that should really be followed in that time, and most of the time for us. Remember, I told you the world's broken into zones. Whoever owns that zone carries the voice of what needs to happen in that particular zone. So that becomes very clear and very easy. We follow the directions and in need of that particular person. Bringing aid to whatever country it may be. I mean, you happen to be maybe talking about helping people that are in Gaza right now, but we're also ferrying aid to the Ukraine to help the Ukrainian people get through that invasion. We have there's things going on in Haiti right now with gang violence that we're moving things that way. There's the world. We're not short on crises happening across the globe, but the thing is, we prepare for these moments. And when we talk about crisis, I don't necessarily think like big companies or any companies think about their worst day. Most of them, I think, are building themselves to be at their best, optimal, all the time. But how many times do we think about, at our worst moment within this organization, how can we react to make sure that we can still execute, that we can still perform, that we can still succeed? I think that's one good thing about the military is we run exercises all the time to make sure that we can respond regardless of where it's at or the situation. And it may not be the exact situation, but there's enough foundational training that we can still operate and execute when asked to.
Well, that's a definite parallel to the idea of, hey, let's practice what happens when a customer calls and complains, and we're looking for the worst situations. One of my favorite examples of crisis management handled so beautifully was when Howard Schultz, the CEO of Starbucks, got word. This happened probably about 6 or 7 years ago, maybe not quite that long ago, in Philadelphia. Two guests had come into a Starbucks, sat down, African American, and they didn't buy anything. They were waiting for their friend. One of them had to go to the bathroom. Well, apparently at that location, you have to ask for a key to go to the bathroom. That reminds me of an old gas station. But anyway,
Was there a tire attached to it or something?
I don't know. The manager said, it's for guests and you haven't bought anything. So actually, you can't go to the bathroom and you're going to have to leave. And they said, well, but we're waiting for a friend. Yeah, right. So they didn't leave. The manager picks up the phone, calls the police. Police come. And by the way, not just like one car came in with an officer to talk. No, squad cars show up and they cuff these guys and they take them out right about the time their friend is walking in. And so it was a terrible crisis from the standpoint of a major brand being recognized supposedly for great service. And what happened is Schultz got wind of this in San Francisco, Seattle, where his offices were, excuse me. I believe that's where they were, and said to the press right away, same day, I've got to figure out what's going on. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm flying to Philadelphia overnight. I'll be there tomorrow morning. I want to figure out what's going on. I want to, first of all, apologize to these guys. This isn't the way we do business, but I'm going to find out why this happened, how it happened, and see what I can do to make sure it never happens again. And the head guy gets out there. He reacts quickly. My 5-step process is acknowledge the problem, apologize for it. He did. Discuss what he's going to do, or if you can fix it right now. And he said, I'm going there to take care of it, figure out what we're going to do. And then don't blame anybody. He didn't say, well, we must not train that person very well. We'll take care of that. We'll take him off the front line. No, he said, I'm going. I will be there. And then he acted with urgency. The very next day, he's there. Press releases. By the way, don't know if you know the rest of the story. He even said that day, I don't know how we're going to stop this from ever happening again, because, it could. But what they ultimately did is a couple months later, they shut down the entire North American operation for an afternoon. On a regular day, people would be paying money. They shut the stores down and they did sensitivity training for the entire organization. And he said, this is just the start. I hope other companies will follow suit. So it's a great story, bringing it to corporate America, but, you're dealing at a whole nother level. And you don't plan for those crises. I mean, how could you plan? How could that have ever happened? But it did. But you said we plan for the worst and we practice over and over when we plan for the worst. So unbelievable.
It's funny that crisis or tense moments either fracture or forge a leader. An organization can see how to go forward post-crisis by how the leader handled the situation during crisis. And just the way that they handled it through Starbucks obviously was the correct way. And the down day, I would call it a down day that they had to try to get everybody aware of certain situations is good. But then, you got to think long-term, how do I bake that into your organization? How does that just become part of everyday business where we think a certain way, our culture's a certain way, and it's not just a one-off. Everybody's like, oh God, sensitivity training. This is all I need, right? And then you're kind of fighting the system. So I guess one thing I would offer is you kind of got to get to people and really explain 3 things to them, especially if you're making any changes. One thing, usually, no matter what they ask, I think it boils down to 3 things. First off is, where do I fit? Right? You're saying this thing is happening. Where do I fit in that? The second thing is, how does it affect me? Look, we're people. I don't care if you're in the military or not, we're people. We need to know how it's going to personally affect me. And then the last one, if you get the first two right, they can kind of understand, now, how can I contribute in a positive way? So if you have to really answer those sort of questions, especially if there's something new or different that you're going to do, or if an incident happened and you're trying to work your way out of the incident. So something's changed now. Where do I fit? Well, you fit this way. Fine. I see myself in the organization right now. How does it affect me, though, personally? Okay. Now we have to be a little bit more gracious, de-escalate situations whenever possible. Fantastic. And now I see between those two things, now I know how to contribute in a positive way to the organization I'm a part of. So that's just the kind of a way I give advice to really anybody through any situation that you have within an organization, especially when there's change involved. Answer those questions. Those are the questions that people really want to know. I believe, anyway, my humble opinion.
And as a leader, you answer them for yourselves, and you want your people to answer them for themselves as well.
Almost definitely. There has to be, that's the ownership piece.
Mm-hmm.
I think we talked a little bit about this with the entrepreneurs. Like, where do you start this? This can't be in the face of crisis. I think it starts with onboarding people into your organization. I can't emphasize that enough. Man, onboarding is absolutely positively critical, because that's when I understand the norms of the organization. That's where I understand your expectations of me within the organization. That's where I understand what I'm becoming a part of. And you're setting that on day one. And if you don't, and everything's adventure learning, that's where it becomes difficult. My friend
adventure learning, is that what you said?
Yeah,
adventure learning.
Adventure learning is very difficult at times.
That's great.
My one friend came into town, and I haven't seen him in a while. He just retired out of the military. He's working for another company now. And I said, hey, how are things going? He's like, it was hard because I came in and they didn't have like a job description. So he didn't know where he fit. They didn't like, there's a description when you apply for a job, but that's pretty generic. Like, what do you really want out of me? What does this position really do? And then there was no onboarding process to the organization. There was none, absolutely none. I was like, I was absolutely blown away that a company it's a successful, I won't say what it is, but it's a successful company that, there wasn't necessarily, and he's pretty high in the organization because he came in at almost an executive level. And I'm like, well, how do you operate, man? He's like, every day is just a new adventure, trying to figure it out.
Adventure learning.
It
that's
is
great.
Adventure learning. So it's 7 months deep.
I just wrote an article, and I kind of drew a parallel between customer service and basically a car. A company is like a car. You got to bring your car in for service. You got to do the routine maintenance. And I always write a cartoon up and draw a cartoon. My cartoon was some guy going, ugh, we've got to go through customer experience training again. Didn't we do this when I first came on board? And the manager said, yes, we did. And when you were first here, you didn't have that attitude.
Wasn't paying attention.
I know. And this is a perfect time to take a break. We're going to come right back more with BK, also known as Brian Kruzelnick. I got it right. I got to practice the name. BK is coming back with us. Don't go away. We'll be right back. One of my favorite sayings is that customer service isn't a department. It's a philosophy. And it's a philosophy that must be embraced by everyone in the organization all the time, and that's 24/7. So if customer service is important to you, and I know it is, then you will love our virtual training, the ultimate on-demand customer service and experience training program that you can access anytime, anywhere. Now, the course content applies to everyone, regardless of position and responsibility, from senior executives to the most recently hired and everyone in between. You'll discover tips, ideas, and strategies that won't cost your company a fortune, but will produce what I call moments of magic, those positive experiences, and it will happen at every level of your organization. So go to Customer Service VT. That's V as in virtual, T as in training. That's customerservicevt.com. It's time to get customer focused.
You're listening to Amazing Business Radio with best-selling author and customer service and business expert, Shep Hyken.
We're back on Amazing Business Radio. We're talking to BK, Brian Kruzelnick, and we're talking about, wow, crisis management. What happens when a customer is so upset? What happens when an incident happens that impacts a brand? What we're taking it to a whole nother level when we talk about what happened when there's an incident that's affecting the world in so many ways. When we were together about 4 or 5, 6 weeks ago, whenever it was, you talked about how the evacuation of Afghanistan was handled. Was just what, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, if that long, a year ago. When did that happen?
Oh, it's a few years ago now, but
Yeah.
it seems like it was just yesterday,
It
but
does
it is a
seem
few
like,
years ago now.
yeah. And what happened? And so share with us some of the numbers. They blew me. I mean, how many people did you evacuate in short period of time using how many aircraft and personnel and making it happen?
Sure. The what I'm about to share with you happened over 17 days in August. We kind of started like a story. In 17 days in August, we had to evacuate a large number of Afghanis who were being threatened. Their life was being threatened. At the end of the day, we evacuated 123,334 men, women, and children from across 800 aircraft. That's military aircraft. That's industry partners. That's 30 allies and partners who also, were able to offer up some of their aircraft. We went across 9 countries. We went across 8 time zones. We went across 10 safe havens. So those are areas that we had to stop periodically from start point to end point to maybe relook at who we took, make sure we evaluated the situation. We're able to continue. So about 10 safe havens. Unfortunately, as you may know, we lost 13 lives at the Abbey Gate at Kabul. American heroes, one and all, every single one of them. And we also had 20 babies that were born on those aircraft as we were evacuating out. But that in itself is historic, right? It's the largest evacuation the U.S. ever did. But wait, there's more.
Oh, wait,
During
tell
that
me.
time frame, now I'm going to tell you.
17 days in August.
There was a 7.2 magnitude earthquake that happened in Haiti that we had to respond to. During that time frame, there was wildfires in California that burnt up a million acres of land. During that time frame, there was a Category 4 hurricane that came up through Louisiana and kind of went northeast through the United States that we had to respond to. And finally, if that wasn't enough, during that time frame, we had one of our larger aircraft had to have a one-time inspection done across the fleet for a possible safety issue. And we got all that accomplished and executed through 17 days in August.
Wow. At the same time. So let's do the math here. I started to pull up my calculator. 123,334 people, 800 aircraft. I'm doing the math in my head. How many is that per aircraft? Because I'm used to sitting on a plane with like maybe there's 140 people, 160 people, and we're all sitting in nice, comfy seats. And what does that look like?
So we had one of our larger aircrafts called the C-17. And this aircraft is mostly used for cargo, almost exclusively actually for cargo, just because based on the size. But it does have the ability to move humans, move passengers, as we would call them. And with the seats installed, it's about 120 or so people that it's kind of made to move from a passenger point of view. But obviously, as you probably read through magazines and maybe even on the news at that time, there's a point where they had moved 823 people on that single aircraft that really was meant to carry 120. The flight line was being totally overran. They had these people that were just rushing to the aircraft, the evacuees. They had to bunker down the aircraft and slowly take off, right? And they had to make a judgment call. And these guys are trained. These are the most professionally trained force in the world. And they realize the level of risk. They realize the capability of the aircraft, regardless of what we normally do. They know the capability of the aircraft. They knew what the safety parameters were, and they knew they were able to do it. Although unheard of, although never happened before. And to be honest with you, hopefully will never happen again. But they knew that they were going to be able to do it. And during that flight, one person that works in the back, we call that a load master, and they're trying to look at the balance of the weight. They're trying to make sure, in this case, passengers are okay and there's no unsafe conditions. There's a small child that was laying on the metal floor of the aircraft. So instead of seats, people had to be loaded to the floor, sitting down, and then we had cargo straps from one side of the aircraft to the other in intervals that would act almost like a safety belt to make sure that people would stay safe. So we had this one young child freezing because this aircraft in air, 30,000 feet, it's cold. It's very cold.
It's not heated.
And so this young, it's not heated.
Tell me, how many flight attendants? How many flight attendants do you need for 823 passengers?
Well, we don't have flight attendants, right?
No, I'm just kidding.
But you're right. So he saw that person. So he took off his own jacket, his military jacket, and he wrapped that young boy up in his jacket, and he just walked away and continued to do his job. And one crew member happened to see that. One of the air crew had come down to kind of look at the back and help him, and took a picture of it. And that picture you might have seen even today. It's a small boy on that middle floor wrapped in a military jacket. It's become very famous. The jacket itself is actually in the Air Force Museum. And it kind of, I think, defined the whole movement that we did. Aside from everything else that you hear about, that thing boiled down to humanity. Our ability to care for somebody who needed to be cared for. And that one picture epitomized that 17 days of operations. Now, to be fair, in that 17 days, we didn't get everybody from beginning to end, but we got them off the beginning, right? Yeah. The people were still periodically through some of those staging areas and trying to get to wherever that endpoint was. But, that one solitary picture in the most horrific of times really showed the humanity of what we do.
I think that's incredible. It's emotional thinking about it. And the person who took their jacket off, and I mean, everybody else, cold? Yeah, I'm trying to stay cold. But this person, not only in the military, you're sacrificing, I mean, you're at risk. I mean, in a sense, that's a sacrifice. You're traveling around the world, oftentimes away from your family. And now you're willing to give up personal comfort for somebody who you don't even know. It's incredible. All right. How do I shift gears back into, well, you did some things during this time that were, I would say, outside of the typical process. And I'm sure, like you said, you've never done this before and you hope you never have to do it again. How do you break protocol, for lack of a better term, or break a system that has never been stretched the way this was? And then, by the way, it sets precedent for the future, I would assume, at some level. Let's talk about how maybe there were some lessons that were learned that you could or could not do in the future.
Yeah, that's I wouldn't say a loaded question or statement, but there's a lot to that, right?
Yeah.
I think maybe the first thing is you have to train your people to the level that makes them successful. Every one of our members are highly, highly trained, right? We train for the best, we train for the worst case scenarios. So there's a level of comfort when you're feeling the pressure of a crisis, knowing that you have this foundation of strong training to rely on. And that's what they did. They also knew their weapons. We call it a weapon system. They knew their equipment. They knew the left and right limits of that. So they had that into their mind. They also knew what we normally do, right? Our checklists and everything are to normal day operations. So they understood that, but they also understood the capacity and capability of their tools and that they can go further than normal day operations. I think the other part about it is, you talked about it a little bit earlier, and you may not have said it directly, but, when you're away from headquarters, when you're away from the boss, and you have to make a decision real time without somebody peering over your shoulder that's from the next echelon up to say yes or no, you need to have a level of faith that you understand the right answer based off of the organization of organizational culture that you have. So we kind of call that commander's intent. So understanding what in our case, the command or what that CEO or owner of the business, what they want. And the other side is you feel trusted enough to make that decision. So there's a lot of levels of trust involved. So let's recap. Highly trained, knew their equipment, understood commander's intent, understood what needed to happen, and then had the faith in the trust of the organization resting on their shoulders that if they did do this and they pushed the limits of it, which they knew that they're still safe, that no one would kind of come down and try to hammer them in a negative way for doing this because There was trust in their expertise.
Yeah.
And
And that
to the
last
point,
part is really important. That's what we call empowerment. And when you empower somebody, that means you've trusted them. And if they do something that's wrong, you don't nail them hard. You use it as an opportunity to get them to grow. And that's what great leaders do.
and at the end of the day, but this wasn't even wrong because they, like I said, they did it in a safe manner. They held within it, but they still were nervous. I'm not gonna lie,
I'm
they were
sure.
still nervous
Were
because
they
they did
nervous
push the
about
limit.
what? Were they nervous about somebody coming down on them later on, or were they nervous about the operation failing?
They were no, I think they did everything they could to make sure the operations was successful. And they probably, to be honest with you, more people I talked to, no one even thought about that to the end. Like through the whole crisis, they were pushing towards success, never even thought failure was an option, and they went the way they needed to go. But sitting down with my boss as an advisor to my boss, we're like, boss, we need to put out a note to the team, a huge note to the team that says, I trust you. You are the most highly trained members in the entire world. There's nobody better at what you do than you. We have full trust and faith in everything that you're doing right now. And those, this is paraphrasing, of course, but that was the gist of the note. And once that note went out, you almost could hear from across the lands sighs of relief by everybody, because to think it is one thing, to get a note from the highest echelon that you have within the organization saying so is another.
Wow, wow. And I think probably ultimately the commander in chief probably said, "Your people know what they're doing." I mean, that's what it all goes trickles down, if you will. Wow. I can talk to you for like an hour and a half, 2 hours. I know we don't have that kind of time. Before I ask you my final question, anything else related to this experience that you want to share?
I'm going to offer a couple things real quick. For one, we're putting a lot of I don't say pressure, but a lot of responsibility on the leader, as it should be, because you've earned a title. But how does that leader get through? Because that's still a person. Behind every job title you have, there's a human that's executing. So how do we help that person through those times? And I gave this to you guys when we had all the entrepreneurs in. I think first of all, you got to have faith. Have faith in the organization, have faith in yourself, have faith in the processes, have faith in the people executing. You got to have faith. Like I usually say, don't make me do my George Michael impersonation, but you got to have faith, right? You got to have hope. Hope is critically important, because if you have hope, everybody that follows you will have hope, because they're looking to you as the leader.
But
They say
is hope a
sometimes,
strategy? I mean, you've
well,
heard
they
that.
say, well, guess what? Hopelessness is not a strategy either. So I would take hope. At the end
Okay,
of the
I
day,
love that.
you
I
got,
set you up for that.
you did very well done. But you have to have hope at the end of the day. And the last thing is, I say love, but when I say love, I mean it in having passion for what you do and compassion for the people you do it with. That's love. And I think as a leader in these these situations, this crisis, if you kind of have that beacon of light of faith, hope, and love, and on a personal level, really try to get you through and give you that beacon of light to follow. That's one thing I'd offer. The other thing I'd offer is you got to build trust in your organization. This will be quick. You got to build trust in your organization. It's funny, in our personal lives, trust is easy. You read a review and you go buy something. You don't know who the hell that person was you read a review from, but you buy it anyway, right? You might do Airbnb. You stayed in some strange person's house. Some strange person let you stay in their house. You might have taken an Uber. Like, didn't your parents teach you better to get a car with strangers? But you
Only
do it
if
all
they
the
offer
time.
you a piece of candy.
Now, I'm telling you, though, we take these leaps of trust in our personal lives all the time, but we get into where we work, where we spend probably more time than anywhere, and it's become hesitant. So as a leader, you really got to try to work on the ways that you can build that trust in your organization. And if we had another hour, we can go into that, but I won't do that.
Well,
And
maybe
I'll
we'll
pass
do
it
a
back over.
part two down the road. I just want to say, before I ask you that final question, I don't hear from many leaders, and especially somebody that's, Chief Master Sergeant in the command senior. I'm looking at your title here. It's huge. Okay, you're up there. You're in charge, and you use the L word, love. You don't hear a lot of leaders use that word, and I'm so happy that you did today.
I'll tell you, in World War II, collectively across the entire war, about 80 million people lives were lost.
Oh,
And the folks that came back, and the U.S. military, they came back and they wrote a document on pretty much leadership. And in this instruction, now these are hardcore people, right? They lived through one of the most horrific wars we've ever had, and they survived. And they came back and they wrote a document. And in that document, they use the word love over 150 times. Now picture this, World War II. So, 1945. 1945, especially men, because they were mostly men, because the military was, mostly male at that time. 1945, males weren't throwing the word love around, but they came back, especially military men came back and used the word love about 150 times in this document that they wrote on how to lead, especially through times of war. So if you're not using the word love, if they used it, we should be using it.
Wow. My last question is always, is there one more thing you can share with us? And you keep dropping these, I don't want to be, not a pun intended. You're dropping these bombs, boom, big nuggets of wisdom. Is there one thing you can share with us to wrap it all up?
So this is what I pass on to all people I ever talk to in a military organization. I like you to be operationally or be strategically focused. Understand where your organization is going strategically, right? No, the CEO is probably not going to call you up and be like, "Hey, let's sit down and talk about this." But you have to have an idea, because this helps you make decisions when they're not around. You got to be operationally relevant as you maybe move through the echelons of the unit, the organization that you're a part of. You have to understand the bigger picture of the next level that you're a part of, because you now sit at tables that other people aren't. And you don't carry your voice at that time. You carry the voice of everybody who doesn't have a seat. So you have to understand what they do to be able to carry that voice. I would say be tactically brilliant. We spend a lot of time at tactical execution of what we do. You have to be brilliant in that aspect. The last thing I would pass in this quick fire round here is you got to bring harmony to chaos. Don't run after a fire with gasoline. You have to be the cool head in the room. You have to understand that let people talk, let people discuss if that's a particular topic. If it starts getting out of hand, you bring it back down. But you have to be able to bring harmony to chaos, because if not, everybody's going to run around with their hair on fire and nothing's going to get accomplished.
Wow.
So those 4 things I'd offer up.
And all I asked for was one. You underpromised, you over-delivered. This is great. Well, thank you, BK. This has been an amazing experience, an amazing interview. This is why we call it Amazing Business Radio. I can't think of probably this is probably one of the top shows that I've had the privilege of being a part of. So thank you so much for doing this with us.
Well, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity, and have a blessed day, and blessings to all who listen.
Well, thank you. All right, everybody, that wraps it up. Another episode of Amazing Business Radio. We will be back next week with another interview. Please come back. Until that time, this is Shep Hyken reminding you to always be amazing.